Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're taking a look at Techland's newly released zombie action-adventure game, Dying Light: The Beast, and seeing how it compares both technically and from a gameplay perspective to the previous mainline installment of the series, Dying Light 2. For this comparison, both games are being played on a PC, with the graphics settings cranked up to their maximum values at a native 4K resolution. Upscaling solutions will be disabled, and high-intensity settings like ray tracing are enabled when available. However, post-processing effects like motion blur, film grain, and chromatic aberration have been disabled to maximize the clarity of the comparisons. Alright, so let's kick this analysis off by first covering the presentation, starting with a look at our character models. Now, being that these two titles are designed around the first-person perspective, neither game's third-person views of the main protagonist are necessarily amazing. But the texture quality and geometry look decent enough when viewed with the built-in photo mode. And it's worth mentioning the higher resolution texture work, along with the superior hair cards, lighting interaction, and overall softness that helps Kyle Crane and the Beast look significantly better than the protagonist in the previous game. NPC models, especially those in cutscenes, are also very impressive in The Beast, with some great animation work, cinematic lighting, and texture quality to really bring these characters to life, rivaling even some of the more technically impressive first-person games on the market. Dying Light 2 had some great character model designs too, though you can tell there's a slight uptick to the geometric complexity of character faces and the animation work in The Beast that goes a long way in making their performances more believable. The zombie models are slightly different too, in that these zombies look a little bit more decayed than those zombies seen in Dying Light 2. The eyes, for example, have this yellow-red look to them, whereas those zombies in Dying Light 2 still had a bit of color in their iris and less extreme reddening around the cornea. The clothes are generally more ragged and caked in a layer of dirt and mud, and their faces, especially around their mouths, seem to always feature exposed flesh and this dry drool coming down their chins and neck. In general, the zombies in The Beast seem to fall more in line with the look and feel of the zombies in the original game, and appear to be infected for much longer, while many of the zombies in Dying Light 2 look more sickly but more freshly infected in general, with stronger coloration for their clothing and skin, fresh blood effects, and less of that muddy look to the overall model. It's difficult to definitively say that one looks better than the other, as a lot of these changes are more aesthetic-based. But The Beast does feature much better animation work overall, as zombies will now reach up towards the player when they're positioned above. And they'll even perform dual grapples that adds this nice dynamic feel to being swarmed by the horde. Next, let's check out the environments available to explore in either game. As you might recall from my past coverage of Dying Light 2, that game takes place in a fictional European city called Villador, which has been torn apart by decades of the zombie apocalypse, forcing the remaining survivors to rebuild their society high on the rooftops, leaving the city streets below to rot and decay. It's a very inventive premise, and one that helps Dying Light 2 stand apart greatly from the scores of other zombie video games on the market, while also playing into the series' signature parkour mechanics. But what I really appreciate is just how well this translates visually, as dense patches of tall grass along rooftops, little farms, windmills, and even trees dot the lush green skyline, while the yellowed streets rot below, swarmed by hordes of the undead. It's a striking visual design, and one that Techland was very consistent with throughout the game world, even adding in particle effects and smooth color grading filter transitions that better emphasize the duality of its world. What's more, Dying Light 2 also greatly scales up its verticality with the introduction of skyscrapers, giving players more than enough parkour options as they wall run, swing, and slide across the concrete jungle. The game is split into two areas, one representing a more classical European city vibe with more unique architecture and old churches, while the latter section uses more modern architecture, mainly large rectangular skyscrapers, connected by a series of makeshift catwalks, shantytowns, and precarious lifts. What's great about both of these areas is that there's a lot of these interior spaces to explore as well, with nicely decorated spaces that feel authentic, without any need for loading transitions, ensuring a seamless open-world experience. Dying Light: The Beast offers a slightly more traditional approach to its world design, more in line with what fans remember from the original Dying Light title. It too takes place in Europe, this time in a small mountain town called Castor Woods, that features a beautifully rendered central town area surrounded by a dense forested region. This more rural surrounding makes up a bulk of the playable area, and does greatly limit the range of movement available to the player, as there's not very many escape routes to use during nighttime chases. However, the return of vehicles helps to circumvent this, as players can once again drive things like SUVs to clear larger distances, similar to the buggies on offer in Dying Light 1's The Following. As for the town area, this feels more like the classic Dying Light Old Town area, with some beautifully rendered European-based architecture that's a joy to climb around and explore. Interior spaces are greatly detailed just like in previous entries, and as before, can be explored seamlessly, and the various parkour features in this environment come off feeling a bit more natural than the more obvious design of the obstacles across the rooftops in Villador. And I think that's an important point here, as there's a slightly more artificial feel to the world of Dying Light 2, a problem that's not exhibited by the original game or this new The Beast game. The town area in particular feels like a real place, whereas the sprawling cityscape of Villador came off feeling a bit repetitive, with a lot of obvious patterns and repeat structure placement to help pad out its larger size. That's not to say that there weren't some great pathing designs throughout Dying Light 2. I especially love all those interior office areas carved into the side of skyscrapers that players could parkour in and out of. But the smaller, more focused scale of the Beast feels like a return to form for the series, and the return of more rural spaces, while not nearly as much fun in terms of player movement, provides some much needed variety to the gameplay, and ensures that areas like the town don't wear out the game's unique parkour platforming premise. The lighting is another area where I feel this latest game seems to borrow much more heavily from the original title, as it appears to return to that dreary, dark, and washed out look, as opposed to the slightly more vibrant appearance of the sequel. Dying Light 2 offers some phenomenal high-end lighting effects, most notably the ray-traced global illumination and advanced ray-traced reflections that allow for realistic light bounce and window reflections respectively. Dying Light the Beast, on the other hand, doesn't seem to carry forward those effects, at least not yet. According to Techland, ray-traced reflections, global illumination, ambient occlusion, and shadows are all set to return. But as it stands, the game relies on more traditional lighting techniques instead, which do give the game a little bit of a dated feel. It doesn't necessarily look bad, and artistically, I think these traditional lighting methods benefit the game's horror-oriented tone even more, though it does rely a bit too heavily on things like bloom effects, and the filter at play does wash out a lot of the color. What I really appreciate about the Beast's lighting design, though, is the return of true darkness during its terrifying nighttime sequences. For those of you unfamiliar, Dying Light's big selling point is that the zombies become even more powerful and dangerous when the sun sets, with even more deadly, volatile creatures stalking the night that will aggressively pursue the player if triggered. This requires players move cautiously in the darkness, carefully exploring the world and searching for small bits of UV light for safety, all while avoiding the standard hordes of zombies still lurking in the pitch-black alleys below. Dying Light 2 did retain this general concept, but the excess lighting of the moonlight made it so you could easily navigate at night without even needing a flashlight, taking away from the game's extreme horror tone. With the more traditional lighting method and filters at play again, the darkness is once again a major threat, and players will be less bold to travel into the woods without the proper tools to stay alive. Then we have our effects. One aspect of the Dying Light series that I've always appreciated is its particle density, something that helps to really set its post-apocalyptic world apart, as large amounts of tree leaves, dirt, and debris flutter around in the wind constantly. This, coupled with the swaying trees and branches, along with excellent ambient sound design, give the worlds of Dying Light the Beast and its two predecessors some great atmospheric presence, and are further enhanced during intense storm sequences as well. That being said, I was a little bit disappointed with the design of the rain effects used in this latest entry, as they just look incredibly blurry and seem to be smeared across the screen. It doesn't look right at all, and could benefit from a less intense filter effect along with better water droplet effects along the roads and rooftops. The water rendering in general is fairly basic, with some parallax layers mixed with some okay water surface blending, but no real dynamicism when swimming through it, and very basic alpha layers used to simulate direct splashes. Really, the only big standout in the effects department is the game's updated gore effects, that look phenomenal in the Beast, especially when combined with the new animation work afforded by the game's unique mechanics. Now, there are quite a few changes when it comes to the gameplay, many of which seek to undo elements introduced in Dying Light 2 that didn't necessarily resonate as well with audiences. For one, the Beast setting encourages a more classic parkour gameplay feel, returning to a more hands-on approach, with physical wall runs, jumps, vaults, and other climbing methods, as opposed to relying on a bunch of quick ascension and descent tools like before. Things like the parasail, air vents, and vertical lifts don't appear to return with this game, as they're not really needed anymore. Climbing across the rooftops of the central town is extremely intuitive, and requires that you simply jump off of a car and mantle up a few bricks before you're back on the roof again. There's no massive skyscrapers to scale, and finding your way back down to the street is as simple as finding a nearby pile of leaves or vehicle rooftop. Another big change involves the combat. As always, Dying Light the Beast relies primarily on melee combat, with players needing to dodge and block attacks while swinging melee weapons at foes to damage individual limbs for critical hits. It's more or less the same as before, bare some small changes to hit registration and stamina. Though, as I mentioned before, the gore effects have also been improved, giving more weight to these encounters as well. Additionally, the Beast brings back firearms, as this was a highly divisive exclusion in Dying Light 2, though they remain more of a support tool rather than a primary weapon choice, and are better used for triggering explosive containers remotely, rather than engaging zombies directly with them. Finally, there's the titular Beast mode. For reasons explained in the story, the player can now trigger a new Beast mode that pretty much transforms them into the Hulk for a few seconds, with the ability to rip and tear enemies with visceral takedowns, while reducing damage taken. It's a fun twist on the formula, and while it certainly runs the risk of feeling too overpowered at times, the cooldown is lengthy, and it doesn't come into play nearly as much as you'd think. There's a few other cool changes like new boss types, additional threats at night, and other optional open world objectives. Though in general, the best way to compare these two in terms of gameplay is that the Beast feels like a proper return to form for the series. It doesn't quite have the same depth and complexity as the original game, though it feels more like a proper sequel than Dying Light 2 did, both narratively and in terms of its gameplay. Finally, let's wrap up with a brief sound comparison. Which game do you feel has the superior audio quality and design? And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, Dying Light the Beast was a bit of a surprise to me. I had heard occasional mentions of this project, but just assumed it was a big expansion for Dying Light 2. And evidently, this was the intent early on, before ultimately becoming a full-fledged standalone game. For this reason, it's not nearly as dense of a game as Dying Light 2 was. It doesn't have nearly as many missions, there's a lot more repetition, and it's not quite as ambitious overall. If anything, The Beast plays things a bit too safe, which might be refreshing for some fans, but won't necessarily push the series forward either. But regardless, it is a fantastic zombie survival co-op adventure, and worthwhile for players looking for something new and creepy to play this October. But what do you guys think? Are you impressed with Dying Light the Beast? Or do you still prefer Dying Light 2? Let me know in the comment section. And be sure to like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more content on all the latest new releases.